We're still getting a few people in. I'll give it a second before we get started. We supposedly are streaming on YouTube, but we'll see. We've had some problems this morning. Let's see. Well, my name is Tim Selesky. I've been your host at this. I did do the math. I found out I've done this 7 times every other week. And this time I did it in sequential weeks. And the reason is I have some personal obligations next week. So last week, what we had done is I showed you some techniques of taking a very simple, basic furniture design and turning it into a more shapely design and using the power of a CNC to make it. I'm going to review that for a second here. I'm going to go switch to share screen here. And let me get over to it. 1 second. Of course, there we go. Okay, so this is well, this was used in the mailing I did last week. So this originally this project started out as a class that I've taught several times in the last several years. So one of the things I did with the students is I gave them a very simple design, this design right here, for a hall or a sofa table. And then the students were taught how to CNC this out. But rather than a plain sofa table, what I had done is I included several different designs. The design here, which is what I had made last week, showed you how that was done. And then this is design number 3, number 4, 5, and 6. And the reason for having this design here was it's a starting place for people to create their own design. And that's what I covered last week. I'm going to talk about that one more time and a few more details, because what we're going to do is take it to a different level. And I'm going to show you how you can use the CNC and the ability to do 3D carving in order to make it even more interesting than just 2D. So let me get back to another shared screen here and show you what we had done. So this was the drawing I showed you last week. First, I started out with a sketch. So this is the plain hall table. And what I had done is I had sketched out these long lines here to where I tapered the legs of this side table, and I put a curve here for the stretcher. Excuse me, a tapered legs for this sofa table, and I put the curve in there. And then from there, I actually created the actual design. And this is the top. I used a surfboard style top. And what that started out was this, and then it became these elements right here. Make my screen a little bigger so you can see there's the stretcher, there's the 2 legs, and then there's the curved top. And this was the result. So one of the things I showed you last week is how I machined that as well. I'm going to change this to, that'll be fine. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you a technique that I showed students a couple of times on how to take it one more level yet. And that's to turn something into 3D carve. Let me see if it's going to be on a different screen here. So, and if you have questions, by the way, just use the chat function here and go over to that. And I'll try to answer your questions as soon as I can here. Let's see. Okay, got lots of CAD windows. So as you can see on this screen here, I've gotten the word extrude out. Now, if you use any kind of 3D capable CAD software, any kind at all, you'll find that you have the ability to do what's called an extrusion. And essentially, that takes 2-dimensional geometry. In this case, there's a curve as referred to as a rectangle. And I'm going to turn that into a 3D object. And to do that, and I'm not going to go up and get all the menu items here, I'm going to actually use a command called extrude. I'm using Rhino 3D. And your program will vary, but I guarantee you, you'll have this ability. And by pulling up and down, I can extrude out and have a three-dimensional object. So in this case, I didn't set it up so it put a cap on top and bottom, so you can see how that works. Now, by the same token, I'm going to delete that, you can extrude a simple line. In this case, I'm going to take this curvy line here, and I'm going to use extrude curve, and you can see now it extruded it as a two-dimensional or three-dimensional object, even though it's just a line thickness in size. Now, by the same token, you can also create an extrusion through a process called sweeping rails. Now, this term will be something very much like that in your CAD program. And I verified that you can do this in Fusion 360, and you can do this in Aspire, and I'm sure almost any other program will have that. This is a basic 3D operation. So in this case, I'm going to take a single rail, and that's the curve I just showed you here, and I'm going to go sweep one, and again, things will vary. So I picked out the curve, and next I'm going to pick out the cross sections, in this case this and this, and well, I just got disrupted because of the somebody had just checked in here. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to redo that. So I'm going to, here is my rail, and then here and here, and then it's going to fill all this in. So you can see what happened here. So in this case, this line here is a little shorter than this line here. But what it did is essentially use the sweeping operation to do that. So I'm going to make that go away. And now I'm going to try it with these curves that I drew here. See the green curve line and this green curve line back here. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to go sweep one again. Take this as a cross section, this as a cross section, hit a return. And now you could see how it bends around in these different types of shapes. It's very easy to do. Turns out that this is one of the best things you could do as a woodworker, a digital woodworker, particularly if you want to do something with, take advantage of the 3D aspects, capabilities that are inherent with 3D CAD software and a CNC. A lot of woodworkers don't do this, and a lot of people want to get started with 3D in terms of digital woodworking. This is the best place to start. This time I'm going to sweep two rails. So I'm going to do a different command here. And again, this will be in your menu in different places. I'm going to do sweep two, which is a Rhino command. I'm going to identify this rail, and then these three different cross sections. Notice they curve differently. And now you could see this curve. So with that in mind, you could see what's going on here. All of a sudden, I have this delicious curve that goes up and down, around and around. That turns out to be something that, again, that's very useful in terms of digital woodworking. And part of the reason is most of our stuff, most of the things we make in terms of furniture parts has sections, and there's a left side and a right side as well. So now over to this drawing here. So I drew this simple shape here. Just imagine that it's a leg for lack of a better excuse here. So here's the two-dimensional drawing here. It got extruded this way. Now you can see right off the bat that that's going to be awfully thick and not very attractive. So one of the things I showed you last week is it's a good idea to taper things and to emphasize movement toward a point. So in this case here, for an illustration, I drew a surface that would intersect with this flat slab. So here's one of the simple things you could do. That simply, instead of having everything being flat, which is common woodworking, makes one side thinner, one side thicker. So I'm going to use that to slice through here. I've already done that, so you can see that right here. So this end here is quite a bit thinner than the other end. So that in itself helps. But let's take it a step further. I just mentioned sweep two. So you can see I have this extrusion down here. Now I'm going to sweep 2 rails again. I'm going to go in here, sweep 2. I'm going to identify this side there, this curve, and the second rail here, curve, and then this and this and this as a cross section. Now you can see what's going on here. Now I'm getting some shape. Now it's starting to get a little more interesting. I left this bottom part thick. Don't worry about it. I'm just trying to illustrate the top part of the surface. So I'll do the same thing, but I'm going to do it twice. This time I'm going to do it twice with 2 different types of curves. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to put a chamfer along here, these straight lines here, and a curve along this side. So again, imagine that this is a leg of some sort. So I'm going to go up here, sweep 2. I'm going to identify first this curve here, this curve there, and then this is the cross sections that I'll pick out, these 2 here. I hit a return, it fills it in. Now I have a chamfer that's curved and sweeps from a thin part of the leg to the thick part of the leg. I'll do it again on the other side, and this time I'm going to do a soft curve. So go up here, sweep 2. I'm going to pick out that polysurface edge, this curve here, cross section, and do it again. Now we're starting to get very interesting. So I got a chamfer on one side and a curve on another side, and the whole thing slopes from thinner down here to thicker up here. So I've showed this trick a number of times in classes. I can't emphasize this enough. This is one of the best things I could show you about how to take your furniture making or furniture design or a project of some sort and make it far more interesting with a simple command called sweep or a sweep process, whatever it is inside your program. Let me get back to out of this share. So that's how I actually have created a, sorry, backwards here. This table back here, over here, that's 2D. I'm going to show you how I did some of that in 3D. This will be another really quick demo. I'll show you that process, and then I'm going to show you how it got set up and how it gets machined. So let's go back into share, and let me see here. I think this one. Okay. So back to this screen here, you can see it's 2D. And what right here is what you saw in the back behind me over here, over my shoulder. So in this case, I'm going to go down here. I've done some samples down here. I'll show you how I do it. And I'll show you the result. So I'm simply going to work on the top surface here. So I've got a tapering chamfer here, and I've got this curve here in this leg. And then the stretcher is going to make a long arcing curve over here, then another curve down the other side. So I'm going to do that process again. I'm going to sweep 2 curves. So 2 rails, excuse me. I'll start with this part here. There is rail number 1 in blue. Rail number 2 in blue. And now the cross sections. And there's the cross section right at the intersection. It fills it in. And do the same thing here. Do it again. I'm going to repeat it. Rail number 1, number 2, cross section, and so on. So what I have here is it slopes down, excuse me, to a tighter area here. It's a wider chamfer at the bottom, which tends to highlight the thinness on this side here. It gets narrower as it comes up to this intersection. It goes through here. Now I'll do the stretcher, the same routine. Rail, rail, cross section, and the cross section over on this side. Oop, I guess I hit the wrong one here. Sorry about that. I'll do the back side instead. So rail, curve, cross section, and do the one on the other side. So you can see that happen there. I'll do it again. This one, the curve, curve, cross section, and cross section. So fills it out. So to get down to the end here, you can see what it looks like when it's all out. So you can see the curves in here, the lines. See how it narrows even more out to here? That is a visual trick that designers use. With that hard edge, it emphasizes that. Now, if you go back and you can see I did the same thing, same technique with the top. Now, this is the bottom of the top. Now, except for here, she used a hard line. This is actually a sharp line here. This emphasizes when you get the side view of the top, it makes it crisper because it comes to the center point. So to do that, I'm going to do sweep 2 again, and I'll take that curve, these cross sections, and that cross section. So you can see that nice effect going through here. Move back, you can see what it looks like when it's done. Now you put it all together and you end up with tapered legs with a chamfer on the inside that sweeps around to match the curve of the top. And that's how it works. And it works great. The process just works terrific. Now, how do you machine that? How do you make it? Where do you go from there? I'm going to show you actually a short video. As Norm Abram used to say, I came in a little early today, got a few things done. So let me go to share screen, and this video here, I'll talk about it, and I'll show you how it gets set up. So this is what I made this morning. I made a miniature version of this. Don't worry, the audio will go away in a second. So I have used a piece of scrap that I have, and some wood in bad shape. And now I'm doing the profile cut or the contour cut, depending on your software. Essentially, I'm cutting around the outside of it. And the reason for this is it makes more room for the bits that I'm going to use to carve. I prefer to do this process first. And you could hold that wood into place with either some sort of tab, or in this case, I just left about 1/8 of an inch layer at the bottom. Now it's going to go through the second operation. And what it's going to do is rough out the material. You can see it all done in there. So it did this really, I call it terracing, but it's like a topographic map. Now it's going to do the third operation, and now it's going to do the finishing. This is going to smooth it out. And I used a process called parallel finishing. And parallel finishing is just like mowing the lawn. So the CNC itself, the spindle will move up and down depending on the contour that it's trying to follow, and it overlaps each cut. In this case, I think I set it to 20 thousandths of an inch, if I remember right. And I'll show you how I set that up here in a second. So there it is there. So let's pause that. And now I'll show you what it looks like. It's still sitting on the bed behind me, so hang in there. All right. So this is a little bit smaller and a little shallower than the leg that I did in the drawing. But you can get the idea here. Being shallower, you're not going to see this line that goes through here very well, but it's there. It's chamfer that I put in there. You can see maybe, well, I'd have to cut this out for you to see it. You can see a little bit in the reflection here. and then this is the soft, smooth curve. Now, I didn't do anything in the backside. That's a project for another day. But this was all done using exactly what I'm going to show you now. Hang on. So if you got questions, again, feel free to type them in. I'm going to go back to one more shared screen. And if I can find the right one, there we go. So there is the object that was just cut behind me. So it's sort of a leg shape. So you can see that there, the final object has got this gentle curve at the bottom, a little chamfer here, chamfer there, a little gentle curve. Now, I mentioned that this is a three-step process for machining. I prefer to do the outside cut, the contour cut first. And I'm going to click on that. You can see how it's set up to go around the 3D piece that I'm cutting. So it cuts all the way around. It does it in multiple passes. And if I zoom in here, you can see that the final run is above the surface. So I left about 1/8 of an inch or so. The settings on this will depend on your CAM software, but in general, they're all going to work the same. I picked out a tool, in this case, a 1/2 inch flat mill. I set my speeds, my cut levels. I told it what my ultimate depth was, and I said 7/8 of an inch deep. And I told it to cut it in 15 thousandths of an inch passes. Some other cut parameters got set here. Mostly, you know, what side of the curve to cut and all the rest of that. So in this case, it worked like that. Next step, horizontal roughing. So you can see these are the tool paths in cyan here. So you can see what goes on from the side. You could see that it cuts some and it drops down for another section, drops down for another section, and does all that. And again, I'll show you the simulation here in a second. So remember in that video I showed you there's a big chunk here, a big chunk here. I did this in big chunks so it showed up a little better. Normally I do little simpler steps or more gentle steps. So, and then here's parallel finishing to where it goes, starts down here and it goes back and forth, again, like mowing the lawn. So let's see how that works out. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to hit simulate. Let me turn on my box material and stock. There we go. So this is what I'm going to be cutting out of. And I'll hit simulate. Oh, I didn't turn it on, my fault. There we go. Let's do it again. So now it'll simulate the cut. You can see it cut it out of the board that I started with. Next step, horizontal roughing, and it's going to simulate again. And you can see it go through these steps. Let me turn off the tool path so you can see how it looks like all carved out. That's what we'd shown in the video. And then finally, parallel finishing, simulate back and forth till you ultimately end up with the shape that you started with. Get the part out of there so you can kind of see what goes on. You can see there's a little bit of a chamfer showing up on this side. So that's how it's done. That's how it works. I'll show you what it looks like in terms of the furniture that I showed you here in 1 second. So this is the piece that I started from in 2D. This was a half-scale model. So you can see that. Now I turned it into a 3D object by machining it. Let me show you a quick photo here. I actually, and I do this quite a bit, takes quite a bit of planning, but I actually machined the parts already assembled. Here's a photograph you could see. See, it didn't show up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I actually machined this already assembled. You get certain advantages that way. For one, your fit and your joinery is all done while the object's sort of big and large. And then from there, it becomes a lot easier to deal with. Now, the legs themselves, this was a test cut. So I didn't have thick enough wood. I was using scrap. So if you look along the sides there, you can see this long taper here. and it actually gets thinner as it comes up here. This accentuates, let me see here, I got to get back farther enough. This accentuates the line here by getting narrower on this side here. And that line, that sharp edge, makes that line show up more. Then you can see the same thing happen up here. This is not parallel, it actually gets thinner here in the center. And that draws the line. And then from the profile on the top, you can see that it actually is curved as well. All that can be done by using simple sweep commands. Now the top itself, same thing happened here. So from the side, I mentioned that it comes up actually to a point in the center. On the side, you get this real emphasis that makes the thick and the thin part show up more. And then down on the end here, this is nice and rounded here. And you can see here a little reflection. It gets narrower here and wider out here. All done with sweeping from this rail, in essence, this inner oval here to the outer oval, and then putting in cross sections to define how that shape goes. So, are there any questions? Any questions? A good time for questions. Ah, one just popped in. Previous seminars, this is from Joel. You talked about milling long parts on small CNCs. Vectrix make this easy with a tiling function. Yep, some programs do that. What's the equivalent in the CAM software you are using? Can you briefly demonstrate? There is no pure tiling function in the software that I use. I built an array. An array allows you to, I use my pinpoints or my registration points, and I simply move the object. Maybe there's a tiling section in Rhino. I don't know. I just never discovered it. It's not really been an issue for me because I just stagger things over and do that. I wouldn't be surprised if that shows up in other programs. Before I forget, I want to mention a couple of things. I brought this up last week. I'm not going to be doing the workshops every other week as things are starting to open up. For example, Seattle is going into phase 2, or phase 2. And so people are getting out and about a little more, and they have a little more time in their weekends, getting out from their house a little bit safely. I really hope everybody's being very careful and safe. And so I'm going to do the workshops just once a month. The next workshop will be July 18th on Sunday. I'll come up with a topic. They may be a little longer than the 45 minutes that I'm used to doing. It just depends, because if it's once a month, I need to kind of cover a whole topic and cover all the details. The second thing I mentioned last week is I'm going to start doing a couple of small workshops. The first workshop is the one I announced last week. And it's an invitation for 4 to 5 people. A couple of people have suggested or brought up some interest in this. 4 to 5 people. We're going to build this. We're going to help you design your own side table based upon this sort of standard setup that I have. And I'm going to show you some design tricks on how to do it. And we're going to help you machine it in your own shop. And we'll also cover the 3D aspects that I just covered now. So if you're interested, email me at tim@woodworking.digital, and we'll figure out a way to get you in that workshop going. The workshop will entail 4 to 5, a minimum of hour sessions as a group session with 4 to 5 people. There'll be a half-hour private session with each student and a 10-minute interview, because I need to kind of know where you are, what equipment you're using, all the rest of that. So if you have, say, a shape OCO and you have a small shape OCO and you don't have a lot of room, I'll have to know about how to help accommodate you, your situation with a smaller table, and help you figure out ways to make large pieces like this on your CNC. So if you're interested, again, email me at tim@woodworking.digital. Next question. Can you please go over how you machine pieces that are larger than your CNC table? Also, can you explain 2D versus 2.5D versus 3D? I did that last week. I'll find a way to bring up the file here. Give me one section here. One second here. Shared screen here. Okay. Sorry about the delay. I had to go backwards to do that one, right? All right. Share screen. Okay. So in this example, I'm going to use, well, I'm going to use a small CNC as an example. Machine operation 1. So how did I do this? Well, first of all, I made sure that I had a base that I had registration points on. In this case, I made them a little oversized, so they're 1/2 inch. So you could put a dowel in there, for example, to lock things into place. So I have these holes spaced out, I think, every 4 inches on this board. And then it's doing 2 boards at one time. So it's going to do the bottom 2 legs. Because this spacing is known and these pins are consistent, then I move the entire, these 2 blanks, I move them down to the next station. And now I do this section here. At the same time, it's important to leave some overlap. And I think I showed that, yeah, right down here, down here. So I'm going to machine in the first operation past that a little bit, and in the second operation, I'm going to machine past it a little bit. It's the registration that causes these positions to change. And by having the registration, you can get very consistent results. But this is imperative. That registration has to be cut with your own machine. You can't just do that ahead of time. It has to be cut with your own machine. So a couple more questions have popped up. Can you please go? Okay, Ali, I hope that that helped you with your question. Jim had, thank you for explaining the sweeps for designs. Aspire has that capability and I need to use it more. Yes, if you want a hell of a trick to make your woodworking look different than other folks, then most woodworkers do things pretty flat. Well, then use sweeps, but also just taper the wood a little bit here and there. That helps. That's the best designer advice that I can give you. See, Ali had a second question. Can you explain 2D versus 2.5D? Well, 2D is like this. It's just an outline. 2.5D is really 2D with a simple instruction for depth. That's called 2.5D. So for example, 3D printers, even though they're called 3D, are really they're really 2.5D machines, because all it'll do is create the thickness of the filament that it puts out. In terms of CNCing, let me grab, well, here's an object over here. In terms of CNCing, 2.5D is simply 2D with a definition of depth. In this case, a 1/2 inch piece of MDF. It's very simple. 3D is into curved and complex surfaces and depth. So that's the difference. So a lot of times we think of 2.5D as 3D, but in reality it is just 2.5D. Okay, so how do you finally join the mill pieces? Dominoes or biscuits? Well, this is where the woodworker in you has to come out. Joinery is joinery. CNCs or not, you need good, solid, strong joinery. And you need to think of that in your designs as well. In the case of the legs, these samples here, I used this thinner material because I had some around. You could actually see the dominoes because I cut them. You can see they go through here. So most woodworkers already know that anytime you do a joint at a 45-degree angle like this here, a miter joint, it's the weakest possible joint you can get. So in this case, before I machined, when this was all flat and square, I put in the dominoes, glued everything up, and then I machined it out. A lot harder to do on a 3-dimensional object than it is on a 2-dimensional object. So let's see the rest of the, oh yes, by the way, another trick. So how do you make it interesting? You can machine both sides and then glue it together and you end up with a single object. Thinking again, just another way to take it another step. Backside is varies depending on the situation. So is there any joinery you can directly make with a CNC? Well, you can make most joinery. The problem often happens to do with the vertical aspects of the joinery. Let me grab something over here. All right. So this is obviously a tenon joint. So how do you do that on a CNC? Well, that's where you're probably going to have to modify your CNC. One of the things I like about the Laguna back here is it actually machines into overhangs. So You figure out some way to hold the joint here, and you could sit and make tenons and mortises on the end there. But in terms of the rest of that, let me grab something here. Like the edges here, you could do that on the edge. But in terms of the piece that you just saw here, let me see if I machined the back. I don't think I did. Yes, I did. Okay, I cut out my domino joints on the back of this piece. And then the cross stretchers that go between these different segments here would hold the piece together. I prefer to do this kind of joint using the CNC than with a domino. Domino is great on the edges of things, but it's not so easy to line up things on something large and flat. Other kinds of joinery, you could do dovetails, all kinds of things. You're going to have to build jigs for it and do all kinds of things. So let's see. Do you define a region of the overall part and then overlap by some predetermined amount? For example, 42-inch part must be broken into 21-inch parts with a 1-inch overlap. Also assume pin registration on the part. The answer is yes. I typically overlap a 1/2 inch or 1 inch just because it's simple. It's easy to remember that way. But yes, that's how I do it. So I would do, say I'm doing my first 21 inches, and then I'd shift the part down, and there's a little bit of overlap with the next part, next segment of the part, and that's how I do it. Well, are there any other last minute questions? All right. Oh, yeah, one final thing. I did mention the workshop. I've mentioned that enough times. I want to also bring up that I'm also going to put together a beginner's CNC or digital woodworking workshop. There will be some projects involved. This is if you're really just getting started, and you're maybe still trying to figure out CNC and your CAD software and your CAM software and all the rest of that. That also will be limited to 4 to 5 people. It'll be the same price, $300. It'll be 4 to 5 major sessions where everybody is together, plus a private session, as well as an interview in the beginning. Are there any other questions? My microphone seems to be making noise, so hopefully we're going to hang in there a little bit. All right. Well, I'm going to bring this up again, and that is Happy Father's Day. And I hope everybody stays safe out there. Sweep 2 rails is so powerful in digital woodworking. If you don't use it, you're losing a heck of a good bet. And do things with discretion and don't get too carried away with doing it. You can make things tie yourself into a knot, and that could be a real problem. So for today, I think that's going to be the end of our workshop today. I'll see you guys on July 18th, if not sooner. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Go to my website, woodworking.digital. There'll be links to a follow-up video on this. I usually assemble that and put it up on YouTube at this point. And so you should be able to, see what we have done today. Happy Father's Day to everybody. We'll see you again next time. Thank you.